Namaskar. Unit number 5, Types and Levels of Conflict. Introduction. Society is impossible without conflict, but society is worse than impossible without the control of conflict. We are familiar with conflicts. They are part of our daily life. They are inherent in human relations. But this does not mean that every social relationship is entirely or even partially conflicting all the time. Nor does it mean that every underlying conflicting relationship will be expressed with the same degree and kind of hostility or violence. Conflicts belong to the full complexity of social existence. Their domain is as vast and varied as life itself. One cannot interpret and analyze them in any reasonable depth unless one draws on work done in various disciplines such as anthropology, sociology, history, political science, and international relations and psychoanalysis. Taken together, these disciplines emphasize the importance of an interdisciplinary view of adequately comprehending and complexities of different types and levels of conflict. What do we understand by conflict? Are 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 all conflicts bad or have negative impact? What purposes do they serve? How many types of conflicts can be identified? Are there any unidentified conflicts? This unit tries to address some of these questions. Aims and objectives. This unit will enable you to understand the conceptual problems of identifying the meaning and definition of conflict, functions and objectives of conflict, various kinds, types, labels, and manifestation of conflict. Defining conflicts, conceptual clarifications. The word conflict is derived. The word conflict is derived from the Latin word con, configure, meaning to strike together. Originally, it had a physical rather than moral connotations. Though the English word has both. In the physical sense, it denotes two or more different things moving to occupy the same space at the same time. The logical inconsistency and the process of solution being identical. For example, the logical inconsistency of two billiard balls being in the same place at the same time is resolved by the conflict which result in their to rolling to two different positions. There is no agreement among the scholars on the precise meaning of term conflict. There are as many definitions of the term as are the studies available on the subject. However, some of the following definitions will help us understand this phenomena better. Number one, George Simmel, whom we owe a classical analysis of various forms of conflict, insisted that conflict is a form of so association and that a certain amount of discord, inner divergence, and outer controversy is originally tied up with very elements that ultimately hold the group together. Kenneth Boulding defines conflict as a form of competition in which the competing parties recognize that they have mutually incompatible goals. Lewis Kozer, who offered one of the most influential definitions of conflict, regarded as a struggle over values and claims to scarce status, power, and resource in which the aims of the opponents are to neutralize, injure, or eliminate the rivals. Jairam and Sabrebal defined thus conflict is a comprehensive category encompassing a variety of phenomena from brawl in the bazaar to wars between nations. Park and Burgess write that conflict is always conscious. Indeed, it evokes the deepest emotions and strongest passion and enlists the greatest centralization of attention and of effort. Both competition and conflict are form of struggle. Competition, however, is continuous and impersonal. Conflict is intermittent and personal. Number 5, according to Robert C. North, a conflict emerges whenever two or more persons or groups seek to possess the same object, occupy the same space, and the same exclusive position. play incompatible goals or undertake mutually incompatible means for achieving their purposes. Number 7, the conception identifying conflict with violent interactions in various behavior in which the conception identifying conflict with violent interactions in which behavior and perceptions are in opposition has remained a basic conception in conflict studies. Mack and Snyder, without offering a specific definition, identify the distinguishing characteristics of the range of conflict phenomena as one, the existence of two or more parties. Number second, their interaction arises from a condition of resource scarcity or position scarcity. Number three, they engage in mutually opposing actions. Number four, their behavior is intended to damage, injure, or eliminate the other party. Number five, their interactions are overt and can be measured or revealed and, and reevaluated by outside observers. Number seven, Mahatma Gandhi's view of conflict and the importance of expressing it is one of his most significant insights, and he found it confirmed in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu religious scripture. According to his interpretation, the Gita regards each person as possessing truth and untruth together. The field of battle is in our own body. Gandhi said in its teachings, summarizing its teachings. Number 8, one finds altogether a different understanding of the meaning of international conflicts, civil wars, or wars in the literature on conflict. Disagreement over the exact notion of the conflict as a term in the domain of international relations dominates until today. Different understandings of international conflict can be discerned from browsing of the literature. Singer and Small define conflicts as violent disputes in which at least one of the combatant parties is a state and there are at least 100 battle deaths. This definition covers exclusively the soldiers and other military staff. Civilian victims are, however, not considered. This definition was criticized by other studies. Three Research Institute of Conflict also attempt a definition of conflict. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, a major armed conflict is defined as the use of armed force between the military forces of two or more governments or of one government and at least one organized armed group, resulting in the battle related death of at least 1000 people in any single calendar year, and in which the incompatibility concerns control of government and of or territory. Also, the Uppsala Conflict Database (UPDP) follows this very narrowly composed conflict notion. An armed conflict is defined as a contested incompatibility that concerns government or territory or both, when the use of armed force between two parties results in at least 25 battle related death. One of these two parties, at least one, has to be the government of a state. However, it may be noted that other definitions of conflict have broader scope. For example, the Heisenberg Institute for International Conflict Research defines conflict as the clashing of interest positional differences on national values of some duration and magnitude between at least two parties, organized group of states, organizations that are determined to pursue their interest and win their cases. This definition testifies the fact that numbers of conflict take place in weak or already collapsed failed states which are not capable to intervene in the conflict with their own troops. Also, conflict in which the state power is not one of the parties to conflict are covered by this definition. Thus, there are divergent definitions of the concept of conflict in different social sciences, including international politics and peace and conflict studies. Each one of the definitions included in this unit section adds a new insight and perspective to our understanding of the complex phenomena called conflict. Functions, objectives of conflict. Scholars of conflict studies do not believe, like an average person, that all conflicts are bad, as they serve positive social functions. Conflict prevents the ossification of the social system by exercising pressure for innovation and creativity. George Sorel felt that a social system was in need of conflict if only to renew its energies and revitalize its creative forces. Kozer states that conflict within and between groups in a society can prevent accommodations and habitual relations from progressively improvising creativity. The clash of values and interest, the tension between what is and what is and what some groups feel ought to be, the conflict between vested interest and new strata and groups demanding their share of power, wealth, and status have been productive of vitality. Note of example: the contrast between the frozen world of the Middle Ages and the burst of creativity that accompanied the thaw that set in with Renaissance civilization. According to John Dewey, conflict is a guidely of thought. It stirs us to observation and memory. It instigates to invention. It shocks us out of sheep like passivity and sets us at nothing and contriving. Conflict is a shine qua non of reflection and ingenuity. Conflict not only generate new norms and new institutions, it may also be simultaneing directly in the economic and technological realm. Economic historians often have pointed out that much technological improvement has resulted from the conflict activity of trade unions through the rising of wage levels. It may be noted that the extreme mechanization of coal mining in the United States has been partly explained by the existence of militant unionism is in the American coalfields. Kozer writes that a natural scientist, Waldemar Camphor, describing the function of earthquakes, stated in 1952 admirably what would be considered the function of conflict. The scientist wrote, "There is nothing abnormal about an earthquake. An unshakable earth would be a dead earth. A quake is the earth's way of maintaining its equilibrium, a form of adjustment that enables the crust to yield to stresses that tend to recognize and redistribute the material of which it is composed. The larger the shift, the more violent the quake, and the more frequent the shifts, the more frequent are the shocks. According to Marx, conflict leads not only to ever-changing relations while the existing social structure, but the total social system undergoes transformation through conflict. A central thesis of Arnold Toynbee's monumental work, A Study of History, reveals that a group or a system that no longer is challenged is no longer capable of creative response. It may subsist wedded to the eternal study of precedent and tradition, but it is no longer capable of renewal. Most contemporary social scientists lay stress on the constructive consequences of conflict relations. Dublin's five central propositions constitute a broader thesis. Intergroup conflict is a fundamental institutionalized social process which determines the direction of social change and in effect defines social welfare. Mack and Snyder consider that through most of this analysis is drawn from experience of industrial relations, the propositions have wider applicability. They also summarize the views of five other scholars. Number one, conflict sets group boundaries by strengthening group cohesive and separateness. Second, conflict reduces tensions and permits maintenance of social interaction and interaction under stress. Number three, conflict clarifies objectives. Number four, conflict results in the establishment of group norms. And number B, without conflict, accommodative relations would result in subordination rather than agreement. To Mahatma Gandhi, conflict has its benefits, and an appreciation of the other point of view enhance one's own perspective. We are all limited to our own angle of vision. Gandhi said, through conflict, one gains a broader view of truth. Number five, 5.1 Types and levels of conflicts. There is no agreement among scholars on the problem of types and levels of conflict. Different scholars have identified different kind or type of conflict. There can be social conflict, inter-community conflict, caste conflict, group conflict, interpersonal conflict, intellectual conflict, economic conflict, cultural conflict, religious conflict, racial or ethnic conflict, ideological conflict, hot and cold conflict, conflict, north and south conflict, regional conflict, international or intranational conflicts, and so on. According to Daniel Sandor, a typology facilitates analysis, and a typology of conflict could facilitate resolving as well as analyzing conflict. Moreover, the study of different typologies of conflict may provide interrelated insights into a given conflict situation. Such insights could enable an analyst and potential third party intervener to see a conflict from various angles, thereby enhancing the likelihood of a more effective response. This section provides an overview of typologies of conflict that we find in the literature of conflict studies. Quincy Wright was one of the earliest political scientists to make a systematic study of conflicts and war. According to him, conflicts can take place among different sorts of entities. He identifies four types of conflicts: physical conflicts, political conflicts, ideological conflicts, and legal conflicts. He distinguishes physical conflict, in which two or more entities try to occupy the same space at the same time, and political conflict, in which a group tries to impose its policy on others. He further distinguishes these two types of conflict from ideological conflict, in which system of thought or of values struggle with each other, and from legal conflicts, in which controversies over claims or demands are adjusted by mutually recognized procedures. He also identifies fifth category of conflict, war. For him, war in the legal sense has been characterized by the union of all four type of conflict, as noted above. War is manifested by the physical struggle of armies to occupy the same space, each seeking to annihilate, disarm, or capture the other; by the political struggle of nations to achieve policies against the resistance of others; by the ideological struggle of people to preserve or extend ways to life and value systems; and by the legal struggle of states to acquire titles, to vindicate claims, to prevent violence, or to punish offenses by recognized procedures of regulated violence. And Anatole Rapoport has proposed a threefold classification of conflicts: fights, games, and debates. Their distinguishing criteria are how the opponent is viewed, the intent of the parties, and the rational content of the situation. In a fight, the opponent is viewed as a nuisance. The intent is to harm him, and the situation is devoid of rationality. In a game, the opponent is viewed like oneself. The intent is to outwit him, and the situation is completely rational. And in a debate, the opponent is viewed as essential but for a different sort. The intent is to convince him, and the situation is presumably rational. Reports three model of conflict dynamics can be elaborated further. He distinguishes the three kind of conflict on the basis of the following four criteria. First, the basis or starting point of the struggle in all three models of conflict differs from each other. In the fights, there is a mutual fear or hostility between the parties. In the games, there is agreement between the parties to strive for mutually incompatible goals within constraint of certain rules, but not where outcome can be predicted in advance. And in the debates, there is disagreement between the parties about what is facts and what are to be values, classes of convictions or outlooks. Second, the image of opponent held by each party is also different. In fights, the image held by each party is mainly a nuance. Preferably, the opponent should disappear or at least be reduced in size or importance. In games, the image of the opponent held by each party is that of an essential partner, seen as a mirror image of the self, preferably a strong opponent who will do his best to win, a rational being whose inner thought processes must be taken into account. In debates, the image of the opponent held by each party is mistaken or misguided. Preferably, the opponent should become a convert to one's own outlook. Third, the objective of each party is also different in three types of conflict. In fights, the objective of each party is to harm, destroy, subdue, or drive away the opponent. In games, it is to outwit the opponent, and in the debates, it is to convince the opponent. Fourth, the model of interaction in all three types also differs. In fights, the mode of interaction is non-rational series of actions and reactions to the others and one's own actions. Use of thrust, threats, violence, etc. And the course of interaction does not depend on goals of the opponent. In games, the parties cooperate by following the rules and by doing their best to provide maximum challenge to the opponent. Actions stratagems chosen on the basis of probable outcomes, and uh, interaction terminates when outcome is obvious to both sides. In debates, the parties engage in verbal interaction of arguments using various techniques of persuasion such as brainwashing, explaining away the opponent's belief, and removing threats associated in the opponent's mind with adopting one's own outlook. Singer's conflict typology is based on the political status of conflict parties. He retains his original distinction between A. Interstate wars and B. Extra systemic, mainly colonial war, but here adds two further classes of known interstate conflict. Number C, civil conflict, in which, unlike B, one protagonist may be an insurgent or revolutionary group within the recognized territorial boundaries of the state, and D, the increasing complex interstate wars in former colonial states, where the challenge may come from culturally defined groups whose members identify with one another and with the group on the basis of shared racial, ethnic, linguistic, religious, or kingship characteristics. K.J. Holsty, in his book 1996 book The State War and the State of War, has also adapted his typology. He earlier categorized international conflict up to 1989 in terms of 24 issues grouped into five composite sets: conflict over territory, economics, nation states creation, ideology, and human sympathy. He concluded that the incidence of the first two had been declining, but that of the last three was increasing. He later focuses on non-interstate war and bases his on types of, uh, typology on types of actors and or objectives, ending up with four categories of conflict. The number one is standard state versus wars, China and India in 1962, and armed interventions involving significant loss of life, the United States in Vietnam, the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Number B, decolonizing wars of national liberation. Number C, internal wars based on ideological goals. Number C, the Luminoso in Peru, the Montañas in Uruguay, and the nation state was including armed resistance by ethnic, language, and or religious groups, often with the purpose of succession or separation from the state. The Tamils in Sri Lanka, the Igbos in Nigeria. Many social scientists, especially sociologists, have addressed themselves to the task of developing a general classification of social conflict throughout the 20th century. Uh, Pitirim a Sorokin suggests a useful basis for classification of conflict: the nature of the antagonizing units. He distinguishes first between interpersonal and intergroup antagonism, and then lists about 20 different kinds of groups which may be parties or intergroup conflicts. The type of groups he takes includes states, nations, nationalities, races, caste, classes, order, and families. Also religious, political, sex, economic, occupational, ethnic, ideological, ethical, artistic, scientific, philosophical, and territorial groups. Ross, another sociologist, identified 9 types of intergroup conflict, including 4 of those listed by Sorokin: races, classes, sex group, and religious group, and 5 additional types: conflict between generations or age groups, towns versus country, learned versus ignorant, industrial conflict, and intra-class conflict. In 1951, Stuart Chase presented a classification of the following 18 level of conflict: personal quarrels, husband versus wife, employment versus servant, etc. No second, family versus family, feuds, clan versus clan, community quarrel, town versus town, state versus state, sectional quarrel, south versus north, southern Ireland versus Ulster, workers against managers, foremen's union versus the rest of management, jurisdictional dispute between trade unions, etc. Political parties, two or more competing in elections, conflict between the races, white versus black, white versus yellow, white versus red, etc. Religious conflict, Protestant versus Catholic, Hindu versus Muslim, Jews versus Muslim, anti-Semitism, worldwide compound of racial, religious, and cultural antagonism, ideological quarrels, communism versus capitalism, business versus government, labor versus capital, mm, labor versus capital, communism versus socialism, etc. Number 3, occupational conflicts, farmer versus industrial worker, blue collar versus white collar, etc. Number 3, competition within a given industry, denunciation of price cutter and chis- and chiseler. Second, competition between industries, trucks and freight cars, oil versus coal, silk versus rayon, etc. National rivalries, nation versus nation, conflicts between cultures, in groups versus out groups, Cold War, Russia and her satellites versus democracies, East versus West. Thus, Chase provides the better typology and level of conflict than his predecessor. His list of 18 levels represents a fairly large number of domains for special theories of conflict. But since Chase does not consider this an exclusive list, the number implied is even greater and remains indeterminate. And a more compact classification of structural level of conflict is provided by Levine, 1961, pp. Number 1, intra-family, interpersonal conflict between uh, family members, sibling rivalry. Number second, intra-community, interpersonal conflict between members of different families within the small local community, and intergroup conflict between community faction based on neighborhood, descent, class, caste, or associational ties. Number 3, intercommunity, all levels above the single local community but within a single uh, ethno-linguistic entity, the number and identity of labels being extremely variable across cultures. Examples are conflict between local communities, between allied cluster of local communities, between cross communities groupings. Number 4, intercultural conflict between groups belonging to different ethno-linguistic entities or between such entities acting as units. It must be noted that while Levine's classification is based on a anthropological conception of social structure geared to non-industrial societies, Ralph Dahrendorf for 1920 has presented sociological classification gathered to industrial societies. It is based not only on the social structure level of conflict but also on the structural relations between the parties. Fink borrows from Engels, who exhibit the Dahrendorf's classification schemes in tabular form and modifies slightly and presents in this paper as table 1. Taken at face value, this scheme defines 15 type of conflicts at social units roles, family role versus occupational role versus labor union role, social personality versus family role at groups and sectors level, boys versus girl in school class, father versus children, father versus prodigal son, air force versus army, manufacturers association versus unions, episcopalian church versus high church group, free men versus slaves, state versus criminal gang, and societies level, Protestants versus Catholics. At the level of supra-societal relations, Soviet bloc versus Western bloc, Soviet Union versus Hungary, and common market versus France. Kenneth Boulding provides his classification of conflicts based on abstract mathematical conception rather than on levels of social structure. Fink summarizes his eight kind of societal conflicts as follows. Number one, conflict between or among persons. Number one, conflict between or among persons. Number two, boundary conflict between groups, spatially segregated groups. Number three, ecological conflict between groups. Number four, homogeneous organization conflict. Number five, heterogeneous organization conflict. Number six, conflicts between a person and a group. Number seven, conflict between a person and an organization. Number eight, conflict between a group and an organization. John John Galtung provides a simple classification containing four types of conflicts as illustrated in the following table. Number one, individual level, inter-system conflict, inter-system conflict. Individual level, intrapersonal and inter-system interpersonal. Collective level, international and international. To understand Galtang's classification, we should also keep in mind the meaning that he attaches to the terms intra-system and inter-system. He writes, by an intra-system conflict, we mean a conflict that can be found in the smallest subunits in the system, down to the individual actor, whereas an inter-system conflict splits the system in parts, each subsystem standing for its own goal state. Dennis Sandole presented a three-pillar framework of conflict analysis which loses any particular conflict, including its distinguishing characteristics, under pillar 1, the causes and conditions of the conflict, under pillar 2, and conflict intervention and implementation, under pillar 3. According to him, is conflict is process characterized by stages of initiation, escalation, control, maintenance, de-escalation, and some kind of termination. He not only defines but also distinguishes between three kinds of conflicts: latent conflicts, MCPs, manifest conflict processes, MCPs, and aggressive manifest conflict processes, AMCPs. According to him, latent conflicts are conflicts that are developing but have not yet expressed themselves in an observable manner, even for the parties themselves. MCPs are conflicts that have developed to the extent that they are observable but have not been expressed in so far in a violent manner. AMCPs are conflicts that have escalated from MCPs to a level of expression they are not merely capable of being noticed and experienced, but are also destructive to parties, resources, and others as well. Latent conflicts are also known sometimes as non-violent conflicts. According to some studies, there are two types of non-violent conflicts: latent conflicts and manifested conflicts. A latent conflict is defined as a stage in the development of a conflict where parties question existing values, issues, and objectives. that have a national relevance. The latent conflicts must carry some identifiable, observable signs in order to be recognized or and noticed as such. In a latent conflict, the positional differences and the clashing interest must be articulated as demands or claims. The manifest conflict is a stage when tensions are present but are expressed by means below the threshold of violence. Tense relations between the conflicting parties can reach a turning point, enabling them to use force. Economic sections are a means by which a latent conflict can be turned into a manifest. Manifest conflict, like latent conflicts at all stages, are carried out by non-violent means and without the use of armed force. On the other hand, violent conflicts like war, civil war, armed conflicts, etc., are more destructive, in which each party pursues the goal of injuring, destroying, and otherwise forcibly eliminating the other. Thousands of deaths occurs in violent conflicts. They have permanent scars on the parties to the conflict. Wars and violent conflicts are high intensity conflict which lead to widespread destruction. In the 1950s and 1960s, Balding and report argued that the international conflict was of such nature that it might eventually lead to an all-destructive wars as the two superpowers were pursuing goals of nuclear superiority. The scholars of international relations coined the term mad mutually assured destruction to describe the nature of such an eventuality. Thus, it is now clear that conflict typology is a diverse as there are issues and incompatibilities among various individuals, groups, nations, states, nationalities, and organizations. Summary: conflicts are universal. They are present in every family, community, society, state, and or organization. They are inherent part of our social existence. There is no agreement among scholars on the precise definition of the term conflict. There is an academic conflict among scholars on the question of defining the term conflict. Nearly a dozen definitions available in different social science disciplines have been discussed in the unit. Each one has its own merit. All of them collectively add different perspective and insights to our understanding of the nature, types, level, and manifestations of conflict. If we understand each conflict appropriately, a proper and agreeable solution of it can be worked out. Conflicts serve many purposes. All conflicts are not bad and destructive. There has been there have been dialecticians like Hegel and Marx who have defended conflict as a necessary instrument of change and progress. Similarly, sociologists like Simmel and Koser have defended it as a necessary tool of social integration. According to Koser, conflict prevents the ossification of the social system by exercising pressure for innovation and creativity. The current conflict typology is in a state of confusion. There are as many typologies as analysts, and the criteria employed not only vary but are often mutually incompatible. A compilation of some of the different levels used in well-known analysis from the 1990s soon runs to well over 100. Some differentiate in terms of conflict parties, others in terms of conflict issues, but most in terms of hybrid lists that seem to muddle diverse categories. Some have two types, others run to more than 20. The field is littered with typologies suggested by particular authors but discarded by others. This unit provides an overview of diverse type of levels and conflicts. Thank you.